Okay, so I was in the RNT community, and there was a bunch of questions around should you get your stool examined to enable you to pick the right foods, understand what's going on with your gut microbiome, understand what's going on inside and the things that you might not be able to see. Um, and yeah, there's quite a few people asking questions. Obviously, it's especially in the UK. I don't know what it's like in Australia or in America, but in the UK, there's a lot of marketing at the moment around getting
Mm,
your poop examined to then
mm.
build a personalized nutrition plan accordingly for your gut microbiome, etc. What are your thoughts on what's going on?
Yeah. So I noticed this trend pop up every couple of years. There's always something similar to this that is always taking the public by storm, right? And yeah, it's I don't see any validity in this for literally anyone who doesn't have an actual gastrointestinal disorder that has been diagnosed by your actual general practitioner or gastroenterologist. I think a lot of this stuff stems from, oh, if I can improve my gut health, if I can fix my gut health, I'll lose weight. This is the number one motivator that I see people wanting to fix their gut health. It's not because I want to feel better, I want to have more energy. Fundamentally, in their mind, this is the way I see it. I want to fix my gut health so I can lose more weight and lose more body fat because it's my gut health that is the limiting factor from me not being able to lose body fat. And I'm going to
Mm,
go get this test done. And I'm going to be like, oh, look how much attention these people are paying to my microbiome. They understand that I digest and process foods differently. They're going to give me this individualized plan, foods that work for me. So you're already getting a lot of this buy-in because, again, we don't expect people to understand what actually goes on here. We don't expect them to understand the ins and outs of biology, but just with a quick search on PubMed through microbiome stuff, you can see that even if you were to get your stool tested, all you are testing is one small portion of your bowel. Okay. We have bacteria that goes all the way up through the large intestine, predominantly in the large intestine, but there's also some in the small intestine as well. So you are not even getting a full description of your microbiome or what have you. All you're getting is the stuff that you're excreting and pooping out. So that's not even giving you the full story of what's happening in your microbiome. And even if you did know that information, practically, it just doesn't do anything differently. Like at the end of the day, all these tests, what are they going to tell you? Hey, Akash, eat more fruits and vegetables, eat more fiber, minimize processed foods because processed foods probably mess up your gut microbiome. Oh, thank you. I didn't know that prior. I didn't know that eating a donut is going to, you know, mess up my microbiome. Thanks for that. So even if you were to get these tests done, the way I see it, the practical advice is always going to be the same. It's going to be minimize processed food, eat more whole foods, be more active, drink more water, all the things that are going to improve your health and body composition in general are also going to be good for your gut. So this is the problem that I see with so many people looking for, again, a magic bullet, thinking that it's this one thing. As long as I know what foods to feed my microbes, then I'm going to get the results that I want. And that's
mm.
what really grinds my gears.
Well, do you think potentially the how getting the buy-in is, yes, that's a key part of it, but is that potentially a really good thing for people who then embark on such a program or a regimen where they've got the buy-in knowing that they're fueling their microbiome in the way that their microbiome should
Mm.
be fueled, so they get potentially better results?
Yes, I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. I think, again, placebo is extremely strong. I also think this is why a lot of supplements can work. When people spend a lot of money on supplements, maybe by default, they'll start eating better, they'll start sleeping better, they'll start doing the actual things that get them the result. So I would never, ever downplay buy-in, but I just don't want
Mm.
people to go down these rabbit holes and, waste a lot of money, waste a lot of time thinking that they need to, all these eliminate certain foods for the rest of their life, thinking that they can't eat these foods ever again. And then when they do eat those foods, they sort of placebo themselves into thinking, oh, I'm having a gut reaction. That's why my digestion's off. Like I was reading some articles with regards to gluten. This has happened a couple of years ago where there were these people who thought they were sensitive to gluten and people who didn't, or what have you. And the researchers fed these people who said they were claiming to be sensitive to gluten, and they gave them foods. They were like, hey, this is gluten-free, blah, blah, what have you. And these foods did actually contain gluten, but because the people thought that these foods didn't have gluten, they had no response. They had no response. And then after the researchers told them, then they started to get these symptoms. So I think we can never underestimate the power of the mind when it comes to this type of thing as well. And if you believe that a food is going to cause you distress, if you believe that it's your gut microbiome causing you problems, then you're going to fulfill that prophecy, you know?
Yeah.
So it can go one of both ways, but I think there's anything wrong with buy-in. I just think it's important to understand why something is working, and not to get confused with correlation and causation, you know?
So if you go on, if you send your, maybe that's a different discussion in itself of sending your actual poop. But let's say you're bought in on the microbiome and sensitivities that you may or may not have. How do we stop it from becoming? I've lost my train of thought. Let me clap.
That's okay. That's okay.
I was trying to think where I was going to go there. Then I realized I'm
Mm,
trying to. You know what I'm thinking of? I'm thinking of Tasneem. Do you remember her? It's her that it's
yeah.
that classic case of person, but she's so typical to so many people.
Okay. Just gonna make sure this is cut out, right? This is not being
Yeah,
put in.
yeah, yeah. Cut.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
What did you just say?
She's not very typical of the normal
No, I know,
clientele.
I know, I know,
Like
I
she
know.
literally didn't realize that I literally had to tell her she wanted to use your meal plan that you gave in the webinar, which I don't know why she was on. And then she asked, should I measure the rice raw or cooked?
Okay, so she's not typical
She's been
then.
with us. No,
You know,
no.
4 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
What did you say? Causation and correlation. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we know it's there's a difference between causation and correlation, how do if you're listening to this and trying to decipher between what's real and what's not real, how do you apply the right lens onto it? Because the companies or various companies that are promoting this, they've got a very heavy marketing budget. I mean, you've got a very heavy marketing budget. You can see it all the time. You've got influencers talking about it. You've got celebrities talking about it, and that can make you feel, shit, I need to do this. What are some of the lenses you need to apply when looking through some of the claims?
I think it's really difficult, to be honest. Like, unless you have a background in this field, and or you're part of a company like us who has a team who's really into this type of thing, it can be very tricky to differentiate between reality and hype, because unless you have a fundamental understanding of mechanisms of how things work, I can't expect someone to know, or to know what's the right lens I should be looking through. I think a lot of the marketing and a lot of the information they put out, because a lot of the information is true and it's factual, and it's like, yes, your gut microbiome can contribute to your health immensely. You know, having a diverse gut microbiome is beneficial. Yes, highly processed foods will impact your gut bacteria in a negative way. Not getting enough sleep, not getting enough exercise, all these things are all factual. But I think going about using those facts in a way that gets you to fork out additional money or additional resources to give you a test that doesn't really practically change anything, I think is disingenuous. And I think it's taking advantage of people's gullibility. And I think anything that is asking you to do this test, or go get blood work done, or go get whatever, and the company's not actually registered, or from memory, some of these companies are selling things that are not even FDA approved, from memory. I'm not going to name companies, but again, a lot of the stuff that they are promoting and selling just isn't valid. And I don't really have a concrete answer for how people should look at this type of stuff. The way I see it, though, is if it's too good to be true, then it probably is. And I think if people are also trying to tell you this is the new way to do things, new research is showing this, everything you've been told about calories is wrong, that type of language, I think, should be a bit of a not a no-brainer, but that should make you go, oh, what's going on here? Because a lot of these places and companies, they are trying to, tell you calorie counting doesn't work for fat loss. It hasn't been proven in any studies. Yes, it has. The only way to keep weight off over the long term is through calorie control. Now, whether you count calories or not is irrelevant. But to come out with statements like calories don't matter, we don't count calories and so shouldn't you. I think all this stuff can be very appealing to the person who's scrolling and who maybe has like, oh yeah, I've tried calorie counting. Yeah, it doesn't work. These people know exactly what they're talking about. Give me your test. Show me. Tell me that my gut microbiome is damaged. And then I'll buy all your stuff.
Is there any scenario where calories don't matter?
Yes, if you're not trying to lose weight. I think it's one of those things. It's like that they will always matter when it comes to body composition. It's just how you go about reducing them or increasing them. That's where the differentiation comes from. Like you can never, to say that they don't matter at all is just lying. And I think maybe it's just trying to get eyes on you, which is a great way to get people to look at your stuff. But then when you actually read the fine print and you read what they actually say, they are admitting that calories do matter. They are just saying it's hard to track them and it's hard to count them and it's hard to stay in a deficit because of your food choices. So this is where they try to now differentiate between calorie counters. It's either you count calories or you focus on quality food. Why not do both? That is exactly what we do here. We focus on food quality because focusing on food quality allows you to stay in a calorie deficit a lot easier. But that's not us saying that calories don't matter. Of course they do. But I think it's the way it's being communicated that is making people think, oh yeah, no, I don't need to track calories. All I need to do is focus on food quality. I just need to wear a continuous blood glucose monitor and send my stool sample to all these people. And they'll tell me the magic diet that I need for me, because I'm a snowflake, on how to lose weight without counting calories. How good is that? How good does that sound?
Yeah. And when it comes to like not counting calories and you focusing on quality food only, how does that actually work in the real world? Because I've never seen that actually produce genuine body composition results that make a difference. I think in severely overweight people, it can help because you're going from, just garbage food to better food, and naturally you'll drop calories. But I think if you're not in the severely obese range, I think it's very difficult to get some genuine results because you can be eating quality food at a restaurant, but hammering 1,500, 2,000 calories of it in one go.
Easily. Now, is it much harder to overeat quality food if you're preparing it yourself? Yeah, for sure. I would say so. Like it's very, very hard to overeat vegetables and chicken breast and whatever. It's very hard to overconsume that type of thing. Okay, very easy to overconsume pizza, pastas, donuts, all that type of stuff. But this is, again, to say that calories don't matter, or to say, I think if people adopted a diet that focused on high quality foods, as you said earlier, they could naturally put themselves in a bit of a deficit. And then all of a sudden, we get this from our members all the time. I can't eat all this food. I've never eaten all this food, so much food in my life, but I'm dropping weight. It's like, yeah, but because your calories are in check, now you're actually dropping the weight, and people will feel full for so long, even though they're in a relatively steep deficit, right? So I think that's a really good example of how focusing on quality foods can accidentally put you in a calorie deficit, right? So, but that's not to say that calories don't matter. Of course they do. It's just much harder to overeat. Yeah, as I said earlier, massive salad, chicken breast, you eat that, and you're like, I'm done. I don't want to eat more of that. So yeah, I think a focus on quality food for most people will get them moving in the right direction. But there's going to come a point where you're going to have to track these calories, and then it's like, oh, but no, calorie labels are wrong, and they can be 30% off, and I'm not going to say any names or whatnot, but I was just trying to look at evidence to the contrary to what we speak about, and the argument for why calories don't work was this person was citing research of how they had two groups. One group ate a ultra processed diet, and one group ate, 2,500 calories of an ultra processed diet and 2,500 calories of a whole foods diet. And, the people who are eating the ultra processed food diet, after they ate, they went up and had 300 to 400 more calories. That was the argument. And he goes, see, calorie counting doesn't work because eating processed foods makes you eat more food. Okay, so you're admitting that the reason that they didn't lose weight was because they ate more. If they were both calorie matched, I don't care if your food comes from salmon or from the Himalayas or if it comes from a factory. You're going to lose weight. The Twinkie diet guy proved this as well. Now, is that the best way to go about it? No, I would say no. I think you're going to do yourself a massive disservice if all you ate was just whey protein and chocolate. It's not going to work. We've done the if it fits your macros whole escapade. But to say that, to make that as your argument as to why calories don't work is just like, that doesn't make any sense. Yes, eating an ultra processed diet makes you want to eat more food, which ultimately leads to eating more calories. So you eat more. That's why you're not losing the weight. It's not the processed food per se. It's what it does to your ability to regulate your hunger and appetite. That is the issue, which is a different story altogether.
Yeah, and then that's obviously linked to the satiety element, but also potentially other stuff. Where if you're leaning towards those foods, there may be sources of comfort, etc. But that's a whole different discussion that we'll probably come on to. If we stick on this,
different animal.
Yeah, it's a different animal, and probably the real animal to tackle, which is emotional eating. But if we stick on sort of the topic of fads, where we've got calories don't matter. We've got claims around personalization to your biology. Let's discuss the use of stool tests and when does a stool test actually need to happen? Is there any benefit at all? Is there value for people? When would someone's digestion actually inhibit them improving their health and wellness?
Yeah. Well, again, this is something that you're gonna have to speak to your actual gastroenterologist about, because if you've got really watery stools, if you're constipated a lot of the time, all these bowel issues that are not common and they're not healthy, you would know if your bowels are healthy or not just by how many times you're going to the bathroom each day. Like, what's the consistency of your stools? If it's like completely watery all the time, okay, you could have a bug, you could have something going on in there, and you've got to go get that checked out. That is when stool tests can be helpful, because that could be something could be going on that you need to get looked at. But it's going to be referred and recommended by an actual medical professional, not just someone claiming to be like, hey, we can tell you what you should be eating based on the little stool sample that you send us in the mail. So I think if people are having like serious digestive issues, that is the time to go. And you will know this, painful bowel movements, blood in the stool, all that type of stuff. Okay, you need to get something looked at. Oh, okay. Should we clap?
Yeah, clap. Yeah. It's very like I can hear your audio, but I can't really see you. Yeah.
All right. Let me put my Ethernet on.
Yeah, cool.
It's annoying. Can you hear me now? Am I all good now?
Still a bit.
Connection is unstable.
Yeah.
Yeah, it says my connection is a bit unstable. What about now? Better?
That's better. Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Hopefully it lasts. So we're talking about stool samples, when to get it tested.
Yeah. Okay. Ready? Clap you in.
Yep. Yeah. So when to get a stool test is going to come down to just how severe your actual digestive symptoms are. If you have blood in the stool, if you got really watery stool consistently, if it's a change in bowel habits, and these things haven't been fixed by nutrition or lifestyle, then yeah, maybe a stool test could be viable. But I think a lot of people are leaving a lot of low-hanging fruit on the table when it comes to digestion. I think a lot of people overcomplicate digestion. They don't
Mm.
understand how many other factors influence it that go far beyond just food. You know, how you sleep, how active you are, how much water you drink, how much sunlight you get. All these things can impact your digestion far more than you think, you know? So unless all those ducks are in a row, there is no need for you to go get a stool test. There's no need for you to seek out additional gut health things. Like, I think if you're doing those things, you're literally 95% of the way there when it comes to gut health. So outside of like severe medical conditions, or if you've been on like a trip and you may have got a bug or something like that, the validity of stool tests as of now are just zero. They're not going to improve what you do practically right now. So I wouldn't recommend them to anyone.
Yeah. I had some like digestive issues maybe like 10 years ago, um, maybe slightly less. And I think it was basically there's certain foods that just don't agree with me. I think we all have like the odd food that just doesn't agree with me. And I was eating a lot of
Mm.
those. I wasn't
Mm.
saying, and at one point I thought I was gluten intolerant. I realized I wasn't gluten intolerant. I was that, that
Mm.
sample size that you mentioned. I was that person where for
Yeah,
years I thought I
yeah,
was gluten intolerant. Then someone gave it to me,
yeah.
and afterwards, like, do you realize it's not gluten free? I was like, ah. So
Yeah,
since that
yeah,
changed my life, like
yeah.
being part of that accidental. But I had general like gut issues. They usually linked to like bad protein powders I was having, cheap, just shitty quality food that was
Yeah.
going into my system. And one thing I learned in that whole period was the power of just being very aware of how your body responds to different foods. And I think you can get a lot of the benefits of a lot of what these tests do by just simply being aware of how you feel after certain foods. Like I will know
Mm.
certain things even now just won't digest that well. And
Mm.
whether you see it on the other side, which I don't know if that what the reason of that is, potentially is that undigested, or if is that an issue with
Mm.
digestion?
What if you see food? If you see food in the stool, is that what you
Yeah,
mean? Undigested food.
yeah,
Well, some plant matter simply isn't completely broken down, right? So insoluble fiber won't completely be broken down. That's why you'll see little bits of food in your stool, which is nothing to be alarmed about. You know, it's just part of the package as it goes
yeah,
through. You know,
yeah.
so nothing to be
So
concerned about.
so that's good. But I realized when I was younger, like there were certain foods, I just didn't feel as good as this, and it's not that I felt in a way of, I need to go get checked out because I was having watery stools. It's more just maybe it didn't feel as good as
Mm.
this other food did. Like, for example, I know even now rice has digests so much better for me than potatoes. So I just want to have that much
Yeah.
potato. Not that I'll have any issues when I have potato, but I just know I feel really good when I have rice. So I think one of the benefits of like just being more aware of the foods you are eating, and this really comes down to, for what we have is the investment phase where you experiment with more different foods, experiment with different meals. You can start to understand what makes foods make you feel good and make you perform good and ultimately make you look good. And that can sort of bypass any potential intolerance tests or allergies tests or even just stool sample tests that you may otherwise be thinking of doing.
100% agree. And I think what you just said before, paying attention, being aware, that also ties into being mindful when you're actually eating your food, right? Like we were guilty of this being PTs on the gym floor, scoffing food between clients, this and that, like not actually taking the time to sit and chew your food down to digest it. Like it's still such an overlooked component of digestion. People just, waffing their food down, right?
Mm.
So these things are what you should be looking at first before thinking you need to go again, do a stool test. Are you actually chewing your food? Are you leaving enough time between your meals as well? And another thing, and I sometimes get this, especially on super active days. So I find that there's this sweet spot where a good amount of activity is really good for digestion, but just like with anything, a lot of activity in one day can also hinder digestion in a negative way. Why? Because you have more of your blood is going to your extremities, right? To fuel your activity and your training. So I'll always feel on those heavier days, no matter, again, I'll put in certain strategies such as maybe not having as much fiber on those days and making sure that my training window is made up of easy to digest proteins or easy to digest carbs, stuff like that. And that all helps. But fundamentally, when you're doing a lot of activity on certain days, digestion is just going to be a bit shitty on those days. And just accepting and being like, okay, it is what it is on these days, and that is fine. That's, I think, a much better approach than being like, oh my God, I need to go see a stool. I understand a stool test. This is not right. You know, I feel horrible, you know, because there are other days that it feels really great, you know. And I think it's also important to understand that, like, every day doesn't need to be perfect. No day is ever going to be perfect. You know, every single day my digestion is just spot on. You know, it's just not the case. And maybe, you know, thinking that just because, you know, you're releasing a bit of gas or what have you, you think that's bad. It's like, no, that's normal. Like, you know, farting a little bit is completely fine. It doesn't mean that your digestion is off or anything like that. It's more just, I think people are very sensitive to these things. People think that, oh, I have a little bit of bloating or have a little bit of gas, I have digestive issues. It's like, not really, you know. Being a vegan now, AV, I'm sure the amount of volume that you're eating now, you know, some days you're like, whoa, a little bit gassy today, you know, and that's completely normal because of how much food volume that you're consuming now. You know, does that mean that you have to go get a gut test because of XYZ? I would say no. It's just part of being a normal fermenting human.
Fermenting human. I like that. So before we move on to, I think we want to touch on glucose monitors. If we were to close off the gut chapter, what are if we go nutrition, exercise, and lifestyle, like 3 key pillars, what are the things you want to be focusing on in each? If we go 5 key things to maximize your gut health without needing to send your poop to anyone, what would they be? Let's start with nutrition. What are the key things to tick off?
Definitely want to be focusing on a plant-based diet. This doesn't mean you have to be vegan or vegetarian. It's just that you should have a good amount of plants in your diet. The more variety, the better. I think there's some recommendations of up to 25 to 30 different plants throughout the week. I don't think you have to go to that extreme. I think there's a lot of validity in keeping things relatively the same, but the message is more diversity, the better when it comes to your plants. So this is why I like mixing up vegetables for a lot of people. Minimizing fat intake, especially saturated fat. High saturated fat intake has been shown to disturb the gut microbiota. So yeah, keeping fat at a good level. Keeping your meals spaced out evenly across the day. I think this is a big one. I think leaving at least 4 to 5 hours apart, 3 to 4 hours between main meals, I think is a really good rule of thumb. Try to minimize snacking in between these meals. I think that could be really good. Not eating too late. You don't want to go to bed with a heavy stomach. I think if you can cap your eating 1 to 2 hours before bed, I think that's going to be really, really good. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for nutrition. Load up on fiber, eat a lot of plants. Don't eat too late to close to bedtime. Space your meals out. That's 4.
Yeah, minimize ultra processed. Minimize ultra processed
foods.
Moderate caffeine. Yeah. Probably don't go too hard.
Smash the diet sodas. You'll be all right.
Yeah. Be careful on the caffeines. And then,
yes, that's true.
If we switch gears to exercise, a couple key points.
Exercise, I think walk as much as you can. Walking seems to be the best way to get things moving, especially if you feel like you're a bit backed up. Walking is gentle enough that it's not going to restrict blood flow to your gastrointestinal system, and it's going to get those muscles around the midsection actually contracting in a way that moves things along. So walking can be great, especially after meals if you can do that. Understand that if around intense training days or intense training sessions, try to keep fiber intake relatively low just to keep digestion in a good spot. You don't want to be, again, understand that really, really heavy sessions can make your digestion go a little bit off every now and then. Nothing to worry about. Keep lifting. Again, don't go too hard. Don't go too soft. You'll be all right. Be active. It's probably the best thing you can do for digestion.
Amazing. And lifestyle.
Lifestyle. Do not neglect your sleep. Sleep is literally the ultimate thing when it comes to anything, especially digestion, because you need to understand that sleeping sets your circadian rhythm. Your gastrointestinal system runs on a circadian rhythm and a circadian clock. So when that is all synced up nicely, things just move along very, very nicely as well. So sleep, making sure you get some sunlight if possible throughout the day. Stress management is massive. Stress can impede digestion by a large amount. So the more you can chill out, relax, get some downtime, the better off you're going to be, not just from a digestive standpoint, but just be a better person in life as well.
I think stress is a real underrated hack for digestion, like managing that stress. Like I've noticed
It's
if I'm
huge,
feeling more stressed
huge.
than normal, my digestion
Yeah.
isn't as good. Like it's a direct correlation. I think a lot of people's probably digestive issues
Yep.
stem from
Yep.
that more than anything. Whether that's stress from bad quality foods and nutrition, or stress
Yeah.
from
Agreed.
life events, or life just stresses or work or family relationships, etc. I think that kind of a massive impact on your digestion and what you see on the other side.
Huge, huge, huge. And just to be a little bit nerdy, especially when it comes to like protein digestion as well. So the acid in your stomach actually reduces by quite a bit when you are very stressed out, making it harder to break down food. So yeah, definitely a lot to that.
Amazing. Let's shift gears onto glucose monitors now. So we've covered digestion, but there also seems to be a growing trend for tracking your blood glucose at all times. Is that
Mm.
necessary? Why is it worth it? What's the deal with that?
Yeah, this is again one of those things that people they take a bit of information, they take a grain of truth, and they try to use that to fix all these problems. When again, it's always going to come down to how can I lose weight? Give me the tools to lose weight, and everyone's looking for these hacks, you know. And the thinking is, okay, well, if I know how my body responds to certain foods, I can keep my blood sugar down. Keeping my blood sugar down means I'll lose weight, right? No, no, it doesn't. You know, people automatically assume higher blood glucose levels, especially if you eat something. Oh, sorry. Do you want us to do the clap?
Yeah, yeah, clap. We'll start that section again. But yeah,
Yeah.
the video just went
Just what off the screen.
as it's just stuck. It's stuck in one place.
Okay. Um, still?
It's better. Yeah.
Good stuff. Better. Damn. Is this gonna be or something, or
Is it going to be what? Sorry.
is there gonna be a visual for people to see? Is there like a on
But
YouTube?
usually we usually put the video up, don't we? Hopefully it doesn't impact it, but it's more just making sure it
Okay.
doesn't.
Yeah. So blood glucose monitors.
Yeah, let's go again. So if we shift gears now from gut health and digestion to another growing trend, which is blood glucose monitors and the supposed requirement or benefit of tracking your blood glucose all throughout the day. What's the deal with this?
Yeah. So I think it's one of those things that has taken a grain of truth or like something that is correlated to fat loss and weight loss and trying to use that as the main metric to track things, right? So people assume that just because they are measuring their blood glucose and they're seeing spikes throughout the day, that all of a sudden this means that they are not losing body fat or they shouldn't be eating certain foods, this and that. And at the end of the day, I think people are just focusing on the wrong things. Just because your blood glucose goes up after a meal doesn't mean that's a bad thing. You know, you remember it's meant to go up after a meal, which is okay. Now, yeah, if something makes your blood glucose go super high, okay, maybe that's something you need to pay attention to. But when has a salad ever made someone's blood glucose shoot up like crazy? Do you really need? This goes back to the whole gut testing thing. Do you need a glucose monitor to tell you that eating 10 donuts is going to spike your blood sugar and cause a lot of issues? You probably don't need that. You probably already know, okay, I probably shouldn't be eating that, you know? And then people would make the argument, but, oh, you know, but if I have a certain fruit or, you know, I had this one friend who ate sweet potato and their blood sugar went up. Isn't sweet potato meant to be like a healthy food, this and that? And I think people get caught up in seeing their blood sugar go up, thinking that that's automatically a bad thing. And I think these transient like increases in blood sugar, they don't mean anything, especially if it just comes back down within a couple hours or what have you. It doesn't really matter. And I think, again, people are focusing on these metrics, thinking that that's going to be the answer. But it really isn't, because we know that, as we said earlier, calories matter the most when it comes to fat loss. So even if you were to eat a very high carbohydrate rich diet, you're going to see these blood glucose spikes throughout the day. You're going to see them. And if you're tracking that and you're fearing them, you're like, oh, this diet is not working. My blood glucose is up through the roof. I'm like, okay, well, are you losing body fat? Oh yeah, I actually am. Okay, well then those things don't matter. Now, on the flip side, if you were just to aiming to keep your blood sugar as stable as possible, and all you ate was just fats, because fats are not going to raise your blood sugar. So you'll see that. You'll be like, oh, look how my blood glucose is staying stable. Yeah, but you're overeating every single day, right? Which over the long term ends up being far worse for your metabolic health in general. So this is where people, again, they try to gamify this whole thing, trying to minimize blood glucose spikes, when in fact they are focusing on the wrong metric. And also, because I did this stuff back in the day as well, fundamentally, just being lean, having less body fat on you, having more muscle mass on you, is like the best thing that you can do for your blood glucose anyway. Because when you have relatively small amounts of body fat, decent amount of muscle mass, doesn't matter what your blood sugar is doing throughout the day, your body can deal with it. And that's what you want to be aiming for. Okay. You want to be aiming for getting leaner. That should be the goal. Not, can I make my blood glucose spike minimally? That shouldn't be the goal. Now, can it maybe allow people to bring some awareness to their diet? Maybe, but as I said earlier, you don't need a glucose monitor to tell you to not eat 10 donuts or to not have like 10 drinks at night. Oh, my blood glucose went up when I had like 10 pints of alcohol. No shit, you know? So I think all the information that it's giving you, I just don't think it's relevant. And I think it can also, paralysis by analysis can be massive here as well. Again, focusing on the wrong metric, inducing a lot of fear into people when it comes to food. You know what I mean? Oh, I had a banana, my blood sugar spike, never having banana again. It's like, what? What do you mean? I think it fuels the wrong thing. And I think it gets people to focus on the wrong thing too. You know, and as I said earlier, just getting leaner and having less body fat on you is going to improve your blood glucose control more than anything, you know, and that's what people should be focusing on. But again, they're focusing on these numbers.
Yeah. I remember I fell for all of this. I mean, like you said at the beginning, these things come in waves every couple of years. I remember 10 years ago, I was putting cinnamon in all my food, apple cider vinegar after every single meal.
Glucose disposal agents.
I was taking glucose disposal agents. There was one time I was on holiday with the friends and I was having dessert and I forgot my omega-3s. So, you know, we're in the hotel restaurant. I had to run back to my hotel room, grab the omega-3s, minimize my blood sugar spike as soon as possible. And, you know, order was resumed afterwards because I was trying to avoid any sort of spike. So it was low carb. And if there were carbs, I was using every sort of disposable agent, whether it's through supplements or whether through supposed natural means, to blunt it, because I was scared of insulin spikes and blood sugar.
Yeah.
Until I realized that, because I thought, if you think on a very micro scale, our insulin's a storage hormone. So if you have blood glucose swimming around your bloodstream and you have insulin spiked up, you're going to store more body fat. That was like the very, very simplified way of saying it. But that was it. That was all I needed to hear and think, right, I don't want any of that. So yeah, let's get all that out of the way.
Yeah. And I think, again, it comes back down to, if you don't understand the mechanisms and you don't understand the fundamentals, those numbers can scare you. Seeing your blood glucose go up, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to be a diabetic. Or then now trying to use that information to give you a personalized diet, which is what I love. You know, the thing is, though, what we got to realize is that there are other things that affect your blood sugar outside of food. So let's just say you get your perfectly personalized nutrition plan from whatever company telling you this is what you should eat based on your blood glucose. What if the night before you had 3 hours of sleep because your newborn was up all night? Now you can eat these perfectly blood glucose personalized meals and you'll see a massive spike in blood glucose. So, what's going on here? I thought this was supposed to be personalized to me. Well, it is. Well, they claim to be, but because you had these other factors in your life contribute to your blood sugar increasing, then how are you meant to track all this? How are you meant to keep tabs on all this, right? This is what I mean. Like, this is just giving you information that you cannot practically use. We know that if you're not sleeping sufficiently, you're going to have the blood glucose regulation of a type 2 diabetic. You know, it can increase by 40% by, 4 to 5 hours of sleep. That's pretty crazy. 1 or 2 nights of poor sleep can put your blood glucose regulation skills in the toilet. Okay. So there's that, there's stress, there's hydration. All these other things can impact how well you manage blood glucose on a day-to-day basis. So imagine just thinking that, oh, fantastic, I've got my personalized meal plan now. And then you have a poor night's sleep. And no matter what you do, you're still going to see these surges, even though that same meal a couple of days ago had no surges or what have you, even though those surges don't mean shit. Like, if you be in a deficit, and those surges will literally mean nothing. No matter how high your blood glucose goes, if you're in an energy deficit throughout the whole day, you're still going to end up in a better spot 3, 6, 9 months down the line.
Why do they not matter on a micro scale? Because a lot of this marketing and stuff that we used to do back in the day is because of the micro reasons. We don't want to spike it. Why does it not matter on a micro basis?
Because the body is very good at regulating itself when it comes to these things, right? So if we understand energy balance, we know that, okay, as long as I'm in a deficit, it doesn't really matter what happens to my blood glucose, because over time it's going to be in a good spot. I'm burning more energy than I'm storing, right? So now again, can it be a case for, okay, could we manage blood glucose better to manage appetite and satiety? Yeah, I think there could be something there. If you eat a meal that is going to spike your blood sugar crazy high and then drop it super quick, then yeah, you may want to fix that. But when has anyone ever had a protein, fiber-rich meal with a decent amount of healthy fats and some carbohydrates? When has that ever made someone's blood glucose go up like crazy and then straight down and cause a crash? It never has, right? So again, this is where, okay, the practical, maybe there could be some differences between how someone responds to a banana or some fruit, but fundamentally, if your meal composition is still made up of fiber, healthy fats, some protein, which is, again, just part of a healthy diet, your blood glucose excursion or what have you, it just doesn't matter. Like, it's literally going to go up a little bit and then trickle down, what have you. Like, how much variation is there going to be? So it all comes back down to just implementing the same behavior. This is the same behavior that we would give for someone who's got a microbiome issue. Oh, eat more fiber, have more protein, like the message still remains the same. So yeah, I just don't know why people get caught up in these things, that they just love the paralysis by analysis. They love focusing on the things that don't actually make a difference, because it's easier to do that. It's easier to look at your blood glucose versus to not emotionally eat and stay in a deficit for months on end. That's hard. That's hard. I'd much rather look at my little blood glucose monitor.
Well, there was another theory, I think, around like someone saying the number one way to stop a blood sugar spike is to enjoy all your sweets and desserts after you have a full meal. And the reason is because the full meal it's already had the protein, the fats, the fiber included. So you'll stop your natural spikes. That's when you should get your desserts in. But again, the whole thing is predicated, the whole theory of eating is predicated on, trying to minimize your spikes in the day. And that's the reason why you haven't lost weight.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, you can mitigate your spikes by just doing that strategy just then, which is, that could technically work on paper, but over the course of the day, you're still going to be in an energy surplus if you go overboard, regardless of, and again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier. If all you ate was just a high amount of fat throughout the whole day, okay, well, then your blood glucose will stay pretty much flat, but you're going to be gaining body fat, right? Which we know over the long term is bad for your blood glucose regulation. It all just comes down to being lean, being jacked, eating more fiber, eating more protein. Everything else is literally just
noise,
secondary by a mile.
Yeah.
Literally all of it's noise. It's all noise to get you to stop focusing on what you need to actually do.
So yeah. if we look on that micro scale again, this was triggered yesterday on the weekend. I was at on Saturday I was at a family event, and one of my relatives was like, "Oh, we've got honey or maple syrup." They made some like homemade pancakes, and they were like, "Oh yeah, should we have honey or maple syrup?" And someone said, "Oh no, we should go for." They picked one of them. I think it was honey. So I go for honey because the sugar quality is better, so it cause less of a spike. So it was something along those lines. And they were like, "Oh, what do you
Yeah.
think, Akash?" I was like, "Oh, it doesn't matter. Like, you just pick one of them. Like, it's not going to make a difference. Just whichever one you like the taste of, just go with that."
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you like?
So then I was like,
Yeah.
they're like, "Oh, but isn't it about like glycemic index?" And I was like, that stuff doesn't really matter because if you eat with a meal, it's not going to make a difference. But what's the deal with glycemic? Because that's usually the thing of like, oh, white bread versus brown bread, white bread versus sourdough bread, white rice, brown rice. Which one should you
Yeah.
have? Again, is it looking at
Yeah.
mechanistic things and thinking mechanistic micro
Yeah.
analysis and thinking that applies on the macro?
Agreed. Yeah, yeah. It's seeing like, okay, cool. If I have this food in isolation, which is key, this is what happens to my blood glucose. When has anyone ever slice of bread just like that? You know? And then yeah, does it cause a high increase in blood glucose? For sure. But it's all gonna well, I think something that these things we never talk about is the actual portions. Like the glycemic load as well makes a huge difference too. You know? So for example, okay, if I gave you 100 calories worth of white bread alone, but I gave you 2,000 calories of salmon, rice, veggies, what have you, like which one is going to spike your blood glucose more? I'll say the white bread. It's going to spike it
Yeah.
higher. But if you've just eaten 2,000 calories versus 100 calories, what's gonna mess you up over the long term? What's gonna mess up your results more? It's the fact that you ate 2,000 calories, right? So again, this is where people confuse. Um, they don't see the full picture. And when it comes to glycemic index in general, as long as these foods that are potentially high GI, what have you, as long as you are mixing them with protein, with fiber, with healthy fats, like a normal meal that we would encourage, you have nothing to worry about there, And I think this is huge. Whenever we give rice to someone in their plan, they're like, "Oh, do you mean brown rice?" It's like, no, no, no. You go with the white rice. Doesn't matter. Whatever you enjoy eating, right? And they're like, but what about the glucose spike? And I'm like, no, you don't have to worry about it too much. It's more about your total carb intake. It's about everything else in your diet. Those things matter far more than specific foods, especially when they are in a mixed meal. I just think people should worry too much about those things. Again, it's missing the forest for the trees.
So I mean, we're not be able to get any video in the last like 5 minutes. I'm just letting you speak until waiting for it to go. I don't know what the deal
Oh,
is. Yeah,
okay.
it's definitely not my side. I've just run some tests.
Oh,
Is that
that's
it?
so annoying, dude. Just
You know what it is?
I've
It's not
literally
even the
got
fact that we
my
need visual. It's more just it's hard for me to engage because you're there and you're frozen over there. Then I'm hearing things in my voice. It's just difficult
yeah,
for me to keep the energy high, if that makes sense.
yeah. Um, should we log off and then maybe I should restart the computer, see if that helps, or I don't know.
Yeah, maybe let's try that. Give it a
All
restart
right.
and see what happens. All right, I'll
Yeah,
come back
yeah,
on this
okay.
link. Okay, so on this trend of micro macro, which I think it's a really cool topic to go on because one of the areas I think a lot of people struggle with is scale weight fluctuation. The idea of your scale weight in the micro versus the scale weight over trends. Why these fluctuations happen? Is it a case of if you eat a meal a little bit later, your weight goes up slightly, that means you're off
Mm-hmm.
track, or is it a case of just
Yeah.
riding the wave out? What's too micro and what's too macro to when it comes to results and measuring progress
Mm.
and deciding if something needs to change?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And something that we get a lot is scale weight fluctuations. and they really can mess with people's heads because they think that fat loss is this direct input output sort of thing. Like, I do X activity on Monday, therefore my weight should be this on Tuesday. Ipso facto, perfect calculator. And unfortunately, that's just not how our bodies work. It's not how the metabolism works. And this is why we do look at overall trends as well as average weight for the week, for example, So for some people, you may be doing everything right and absolutely nailing it, and you may not see a bit of movement on the scale for a few days or what have you, maybe even like a whole 5-6 days. I know when I'm pushing the envelope from fat loss, I may not get much shift for a good 4 or 5 days, and then all of a sudden, massive drop overnight. And then that's my new baseline, right? Now, again, that's going to vary from person to person. But if I was to freak out during those 4 or 5 days and be like, I need to make a change, I didn't need to make a change. It just took a while for the fat loss to actually show up on the scale. So I think this is where it's so helpful having an objective third eye who knows what they're looking at, knows what they're doing when it comes to understanding physiology and understanding how the body works to keep you in check. Because without that, I think it can be very easy to be like, you don't see the scale move for like 1 or 2 days. You're like, I want to increase steps, add cardio. That's what I need to do because my weight's not moving. It's like, no. You need to understand that the plans that been given to you, especially by us, like we know that this is sufficient to get fat loss moving at the rate that we want. And again, we take all the guesswork out, which is fantastic for our members. But even then, they still freak out. And, I'll still get some of the check-ins to be like, oh, nothing's happening, midweek, nothing's happening. Should we make a change? And I'm like, no. Just hang on. Okay. Trust me. You're definitely in a deficit if you are nailing everything, So it's just important to be patient and to understand that sometimes these things take time to show up, right? So this is why I don't like making changes midweek or doing it. I think you have to wait a whole week to see how the body responds. And even then, sometimes it can be worthwhile holding on because, for example, if a woman is at the end of her cycle, okay, she may be putting in all this effort, doing all the right things, but her scale weight hasn't budged for a good 4 or 5 days. Maybe it's even gone up. Okay, well, this has nothing to do with their plans. It's just because it's time of the month and she's just not going to see her results yet. But even during that time, as long as she's being adherent, she's still losing body fat. It's just not showing up on the scale yet. And this is what I try to tell all of the members who are struggling with scale weight fluctuations. It's like, if you are nailing the process 100% and you are legitimately doing this, weighing everything, tracking everything, doing what is required, you will get the result. It just may not show up tomorrow or the day after. And you have to be patient. Just if you know that you're doing the work, it's only a matter of time when the results show up. So it's knowing how to be patient and understanding that just because you did X amount of steps, or I did my cardio today, why aren't I lighter tomorrow? It's just not how the body works. Just to give you guys some reference, on the days that I do the most activity, so I'm doing like a 3-hour bike ride, I'm going to the gym, whatever, expending 4,000 plus calories on that day. The following day, I'm always heavier. I'm always heavier, but maybe half a kilo or a kilo. Always. Okay. Even if I eat the same amount of food that I would on like a normal day. And the reason for that is because potentially water retention, potentially the digestive stuff that I was talking about earlier. Okay. All these things can impact that, transient scale weight, right? So I know even though I expended 4.5, potentially 5,000 calories in that day, I should be so much lighter the following day. No, it takes a couple of days for my efforts to show up on the scale. And coincidentally, on like after a rest day where I've done minimal cardio, minimal activity, minimal for me, I end up lighter the following day, always. Okay, because I end up building a little bit of stress throughout the week or what have you. And on those really, really active days, I'm probably holding on to a bit more fluid than normal. Okay. So just because you've done a certain amount of activity on one day doesn't mean that you're going to see the efforts of that activity show up the following day. You just need to be patient because the body doesn't work on a day-to-day basis. It works over a couple of days, a week, a month, that type of thing. So I just wanted to share that bit of information because I know some people freak out when they don't see the scale weight going where they want it to go, despite putting in a lot of effort. Okay. So just remember that you will be rewarded for your effort it just may not show up immediately. And that's going to be my best advice for that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of emotional relationships with the scale that get in the way of this. It's like you think, all right, I'm
Massive.
dieting, it needs to go down daily
Every day.
or every time you go on the
Yep.
scale, well, whatever your cadence is, it needs to go down. Otherwise, there's something wrong. And I think that's the real issue where logically most people probably understand it from a logical perspective. I think it's probably that emotional monster inside is probably thinking, oh, you need to go harder. It's that punishment element of, yeah, the scale is only there to show it going down, not as a genuine data point. I think it takes a long time to turn it into a genuine data point in your own head.
Yes. Agreed.
So until you get to that point, I think it is quite an emotional experience of getting on the scale. And it's like, oh, putting all this work in, doing all this thing, and it's not even showing, the one number that could track it, it's not even showing it to me because I'm not lean enough for the body, for the visuals to show it. So it's my only reference point.
Yeah, agreed. And even things like digestion, right? Like, again, if you've missed the bowel movement or something like that, if you haven't had enough water, you've had too much water, maybe you added a bit of extra salt that you normally would, or you went out for a meal, even though the actual portion of the meal was well intentioned, it was a 1 plate rule, you followed all the guidelines, you still may wake up the following day heavier simply because of other factors that are not you overeating, or you adding on body fat. Anytime you see such an increase in scale weight the following day, it's never body fat. Like it's simply just water retention that is just happened via many mechanisms. Like if you don't sleep enough, if you weigh yourself earlier than normal, again, like I notice huge fluctuations if I don't sleep properly, massively, so it's just stuff like that you got to be aware of. But again, it's knowing how to interpret those numbers to be like, okay, well, I know that this is just me not sleeping enough, and I know it's going to come down because I know that I'm nailing everything. Like I know I'm nailing my nutrition. I know I'm nailing my activity. Therefore, the results will come. They just may not show up today because I've had a shitty sleep or I haven't had a bowel movement. And I think it's getting to that point, I think is hard, and as you said earlier, there's a huge emotional attachment to that. But the key takeaway from that is to, regardless of what that you see, whatever, regardless of what the number is, you still do the work that you should be doing, because it will yield the results. It will. We promise you, especially if you're being guided. Now, if you're trying this on your own, I think that makes it 10 times harder, to be fair, because you don't have the accountability. You don't have the objective eye to tell you, hey, you actually are in a deficit. You may think you're in a deficit in your own little brain. So I don't think it works the same. But I think if you have someone in your corner, or you have experts in your corner that can help you with this type of thing, man, I just think it takes out a lot of guesswork. I should remember when you were doing your own prep, like it helped having Ed and I and other coaches helping you along the way, right? Because we're all human. We all need that assistance to some degree to help, rationalize what the hell's going on, right?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to convince me on this.
Yeah.
I think
just to give some context for others, though,
Yeah, just to give some, just to elaborate on one of your points you mentioned of like, if you think you're in a deficit, but you're actually not. I think there's another interesting relationship where you can think you're in a deficit because you think you're following the plan, and yet you have an objective eye saying to you, you're not in a deficit because you're probably eating out too much and you're not factoring it all in for whatever reasons. And you may be thinking I think a common trap people fall into is they're good for like 1 or 2 days, then off, then good, then off. And again, it's looking at things on a micro basis where on a micro level, they're doing well. But on a macro level, 7 days across, they're in maintenance or worse, in a surplus. And that acceptance can be very difficult because, and that's the worst place to be, because you're neither dieting nor maintaining. You're just in that dietary purgatory. And sometimes it just takes that ego to be dropped and accept that you need to change the way you eat when you go out and understand you need weeks and weeks and weeks of consistency, not a couple of days or hours of consistency.
Yeah. And what we've always said, like, you nailing your nutrition or this whole fat loss game, it's harsh, man. Like, I think it's one of the harshest things in the world, because with most things, if you give like 80-85% effort, you're going to get a good result. You know what I mean? But if you're off by 15 to 10% with your nutrition, like if 2 meals out of the week are really, really bad, so when I say bad, I mean just overeating massively, you can literally wipe out your entire deficit. like done. One meal,
Mm.
your deficit is completely done for the whole week. That can be really, really disheartening. And this is why, again, the body doesn't lie, right? What you eat in private, you wear in public. And it's a harsh reality, and yeah, you may not realize. Now, again, like if your scale weight if we go back to the scale weight thing, and it hasn't changed, it's fluctuating for like 2 weeks straight, and it hasn't been going down, you're not in a deficit. You're not
Yeah.
holding water. You're not pooping. You're not dropping body fat because you are overeating somewhere. Somewhere you are, whether you know it or
Mm.
not. And again, I don't think people do it maliciously. I think people maybe forget certain things. They overestimate or they underestimate how much they're eating out,
It's
this and
also a
that.
lack
And
of
yeah,
awareness of your
these things
habits.
add
Like,
up.
your lack of awareness of habits of
Oh,
like you
massively.
picking at the kids' food, picking at your own food when you're cooking, that
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. Like a rule I have, like I'm when I'm cooking, because I'm cooking usually just for myself. And sometimes I cook for Chani. But the good thing is, if I pick up that food, it's basically going into my plate
It's
anyway.
yours.
It's just like
Yeah.
it's not going to be, and I quite enjoy that. But I know that I'm aware that I'm doing it, but at the same time, I know that I'm just basically eating my dinner early, as opposed to
Yeah.
eating other
But
people's
it's in your
dinners,
budget.
eating other people's
Yeah.
dinner. But I think that's an easy
Yeah.
way where you can get subconscious habits of just picking at the food there, picking at your kids' food, you finishing your kids' foods. I was having a conversation
Yeah.
with
Big
another
one.
parent the other day, and they were saying that the big reason why they've gained so much weight is they think, or this is what they blamed it on the fact that one of the habits that they accumulated was getting in the habit of finishing their kids' food. A kid would have a bit of food, especially when they're like 2, 3, 4 years old, where they don't really finish. They just, sometimes they'll eat, sometimes they won't eat. This one have a few bites, and then she just finished the rest of it because she want to waste the food. And that's
Of
very
course.
like it happened. You do that enough times, and you probably will cut. You accumulate a couple thousand calories over the weeks and the months, and pound here, pound
Mhm.
there. It's a death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
A year later, you're 20 pounds up. I haven't
Yeah.
changed anything. You
Yeah. I
haven't
can
changed
see that.
anything. All you've changed is you're still going to the gym 3 times a week, still eating your normal meals.
Mm.
You just been eating someone else's meals just along the way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, okay, then I would just turn it around and go, why are you serving them so much excessive food
Yeah,
as
well,
well? That's another question to ask.
that
Like,
is a big
why
issue.
is their plate so full?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, that's another thing.
they
It's
little
like
child.
this is the
Yeah.
thing. It's like, oh, I want to feed my kid. There's there's an emotional thing of like, oh,
Yeah.
it needs to be, because I actually
Yeah.
didn't realize how little they eat. So when it comes
Yeah.
to when it comes to
They
to
poop
see
so
us.
much though.
Yeah. So when so between like 6 and 9 months, you start the weaning process, right? You introduce some solids. And it was me
Yeah.
thinking, we were like, oh, what's the first meal going to be? I'm like, hey, I think a good bowl of oats, with us in the morning. And, I'll cook, we'll get 3 pans out. Right now, I've got 2 pans, we'll get 3 pans out. Chinese was like, you realize it's gonna be like 2 spoons. Oh, really? It means I thought it might just be a smaller version of the bowl, not like just like literally like it'll be
Yeah.
like a spoon. If you're lucky, it'll
Yeah.
be a spoon. If not, it might just be.
Yeah.
Uh,
So yeah, that's what I mean. Like, why are they serving so much food? It's like subconsciously they're like, I know my kid's not going to finish this, so I get to finish it.
that's another. That you know what? That is probably a conversation people are having in their heads, and they'll never admit it because
Oh,
it's
I
like
don't want to think that.
food is a reward system.
Reward.
Well, we can segue
Yeah.
on nicely onto emotional eating.
Yep.
And the topic of emotional eating, because if you think of emotional eating and stress eating, are arguably the biggest, whatever you want to call it. Some people may relate to stress eating, some people relate to emotional eating. Some people be related to boredom eating. It's all the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the biggest reason why people don't lose weight. I think we as a company
100%.
all know that people's shortcomings are all here. It's some form of muck or vice or whatever it is that's fueling people or habit that's fueling people to eat out of emotion or out of stress. Well, stress is an emotion. So out of emotion, we'll just use that word for today.
Yeah.
And it's something you've said, it's a learned behavior. It's not genetically predisposed.
No,
What is
it's
the
a learned
research?
behavior.
What does the research show on emotional eating?
Yeah, so it's a really tricky one. But yeah, as you just said, there's not like this genetic predisposition where you have this DNA thing that tells you, no, I'm just more prone to emotional eating. No. It is a completely learnt behavior. And again, I think it comes from very early on being rewarded with food or being comforted with food. If we're sad, You know, parents give us food or have this, have these treats, you know. Culturally as well, I think food is just always around. It's always part of like a celebration or even part of a sad event, like a funeral or something. Like there's always something related to food. And I think people just develop these habits over so many years, you know. Oh, I feel tired, I eat more. I feel sad, I eat more. I broke up with my partner, I just eat to comfort myself, you know. And the whole concept of comfort eating just like irks me. Just irks me, you know. And it's just like the reason it irks me so much is just because you're literally just trying to medicate yourself out of the situation. You're trying to medicate, you're not trying to fix the problem, you know. And one of the biggest things that I spoke about, because we did an emotional eating masterclass for our members, was learning how to find better coping mechanisms for your emotions, because this is what it comes down to. It comes down to you not having healthy, sustainable, productive coping mechanisms when it comes to managing stress. That's all this is. And what you have done is you've just turned to food all the time. It's been your thing for so long, and unraveling that, unwinding that is tough, but it can be done. And yeah, what the research shows is, yeah, it's super common. Like there were some surveys that I looked at when in America where I think it was close to 50% of people in the last month were emotionally eating every single week, this and that. I think it's far more than that. I think a lot of people wouldn't report. They underreport how many episodes of them. Like how comfortable are you going to be reporting how many times you binge eat every single week? Like it's not an easy thing for people to admit.
I think we run in one of our surveys, one of our scorecards. One of the questions is, have you regretted the amount you eat in the last week? And I think it's over 80% people would admit that. The other question was, would you feel embarrassed to show a fitness coach your food diary over the last week? Again, over 80% of people would feel embarrassed. So it's definitely higher, right? So it's definitely higher.
Yeah, it's definitely higher. And people are aware of it as well. They know it too. They understand it's a vice.
Well, this is the thing. Like maybe let's discuss before we go into strategies. Why don't we discuss the vicious cycle? Because it becomes a learned behavior through constant repetition, right? On and over again, situations occur, bam, emotional state arises. You do it, repeats. So what is the cycle that constantly repeats? And are there any specific models that you found in the research?
Yeah. So I found this really good model from DBT. So it's dialectical behavioral therapy. It's been shown to be the most effective method of dealing with emotional eating. So it's just like a therapy framework if people want to go through it. I highly recommend getting the book. I think the book is a fantastic guide, and it helps people work through this whole thing. It does a lot of the information that I pulled from a lot of stuff that we're talking about today. I pulled a lot from them, and I give them credit as well. I unfortunately can't remember the authors' names, but what a really simple model is literally just the trigger, the response, reward cycle that they use. You know, so you have this triggering event, okay, whether that's coming home from work, being stressed, having an argument. You have an emotional response to that, usually sadness, usually anger, but sometimes it could be happiness. You know, people eat because they're happy too sometimes, which is but for most people, it's going to be due to sadness, stress, anger, tired, whatever it is. You have the behavior. So we've got the trigger, we've got the emotional feeling, we've got the behavior wanting to get away from that emotion temporarily, depending on how you look at it. And that behavior usually is binge eating. Okay. And you get this temporary relief. So there's you get this increase in dopamine, serotonin, you feel good because of, you know, the dopamine hit that this food has given you. You feel good in the moment. And then you end up feeling regret and despair. And then those feelings then tie in back to that cycle of, okay, I'm feeling sad, lonely. And again, I feel ashamed now. I feel embarrassed because of what I just did. And then you're like, okay, now I'm going to binge eat again and again and again. So it's this weird, crazy, vicious cycle that continues to go. And you just embed the behavior of, when I feel stressed, I go to food. Food is my friend. That becomes your default learning. That becomes your default coping mechanism. And this is, yeah, in my opinion, this is the thing that I believe has led people to gain weight over the years. You know, if I could, I said this, if I could go back in time 10 years ago, I would literally I would get into emotional eating for, I wouldn't give a shit about protein, about training, about calories, metabolism. I would literally go, this is the thing. This is what I wish I went headfirst in from day dot. Because if this isn't in check, if this doesn't work for people, it doesn't matter what they know about protein. It doesn't matter what they know about calories. You know, it doesn't matter what you know about nutrition at all. You could be extremely qualified when it comes to nutrition. But if you do not have this under your belt, emotional regulation and management, doesn't matter what you know, you're never going to succeed. And
And
this
it's
is
good you
why I
say,
see a lot of people who know a lot about nutrition, you know, they
yeah,
know a lot about nutrition, but are still not getting the results they want.
yeah. And this is where you also see people that will naturally also regulate themselves well, even if they don't have much nutritional education. Obviously, those people are far and few between. But the people I do know is it's usually because they don't resort to emotional or stress eating, and they just have 3 or 4 main meals a day. If they open the biscuit jar, they'll have one biscuit, not five. They will have two
Yeah.
bites of the dessert, not the whole dessert, and everyone else's dessert as well. You know, it's these
Yeah.
behaviors, and it's because there isn't that
Yeah. Yeah.
attempt to avoid or attempt to escape. I'm really curious what in this DBT model,
Exactly.
what is the definition of binge eating? Is it by volume or is it by how you feel afterwards?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. It's a bit of both, to be fair. It's uncontrollable urge to eat a high amount of food. So the definition is quite vague. It's usually defined by eating more than what you normally would. But I would say it's a loss of control. It's a loss of, you know, people describe these binge eating episodes as falling into a trance and not even knowing what they're doing until it's done. You know what I mean? They go, well, what the hell just happened? Right. So they just completely like disconnect. They dissociate because that's what they want to do. Right. And when you look at, it's funny when you look at the, because I was getting into the food addiction type stuff as well. I don't think it's there. Like, I think there are similarities between, say, food addiction, drug addiction, alcohol addiction. You know, I know there are people going to like AA meetings for food addiction, you know, so I think it's just a bit different because there are no actual substances in food that make you addicted. And no, not even sugar. Sugar is not addictive. Like that, all that stuff is a bit bullshit. There's nothing in the macronutrients that's making you addicted to the actual substance, like there would be in alcohol or drugs. But I think there is an addiction to using food as a coping mechanism, if that makes sense. So people are addicted to using food as their strategy. And I think that's where they get mixed up between food addiction and just poor emotional regulation.
Is there a difference between food addiction and flavor addiction?
Not really. I think usually people get flavor fatigue, right? So when you go to like a restaurant, the best way to make people eat more food is to have a variety of flavors on board. It's because your satiety is more sensory specific. This is why you can always have
Yeah.
something sweet after a savory meal. Because if you have a ton of savory, you're like, oh, I'm done, I'm full. But then someone brings out the dessert, you're like, oh, I got room for that. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
so you actually look at, yeah, the restaurants that make you eat the most food, they actually have a variety of flavors, and that's what actually makes you overconsume. You know, so I don't know if there's flavor addiction. Um, what would you mean by that?
I think obviously food is much more palatable, or the opportunity to have hyper palatable foods are much more common now than potentially 10, 20, 50, 60, 100 years ago. And humans love
Yeah, yeah,
new flavors. They love anything which is gonna spike that sensory experience and create a sense of, oh my God, what just happened? So I was just thinking,
yeah,
is there a flavor? Is our flavors
yeah,
part of
yeah.
the, you know, part to play in it, or are they just, or are they different, or is it only rocket fuel for making the food episode even more, um, Like that train can just keep going
Yeah,
because
yeah.
there's always more flavors. There's
Yeah, I
always new
think I know what you mean.
flavors.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's something there, but it's more to do with the whole food matrix, right? So how they get the perfect crunch, the perfect texture, the perfect.
I mean, your audio is lagging a bit as well now. Sorry.
Oh my God, what is going on here, man? I don't know what else
It,
to
it,
do.
it was good, and then it just the last like 5 minutes just gone bad again. Your audio was starting to lag as well. That's why I had to clap you in. I was
Yeah.
like, we can get away with no video, but can't be audio lagging.
Okay, and still bad. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Is there any time this week we can finish it up or?
What we'll do is we're starting to work again. It's just unpredictable, I guess, isn't it?
Okay,
Um,
okay. Just go in again
yeah, let's
or?
just go in again. Just go in where you were just now. Do you remember where you were?
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so the flavor thing is interesting because I think there's a lot more to highly processed foods that make them, I would say, like addictive, right? It's more of the texture, the crunch, the bliss point, right? I think they've spent thousands of dollars, finding the perfect bliss point for all these foods, right? The amount of staff and employees they have working on, bars and chocolates or processed foods is actually mental because they want you to want that food. Okay, so I think there's many things that go into creating this ultra processed food that, yeah, makes people want to eat more of it. But I don't think it's anything like addictive. I think it's just because, hey, this food tastes good and I want more of it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So let's dive into some more causes and triggers of emotional eating. So, you've covered some of the environmental and social ones like stressful events, unsupportive family members, colleagues, bad relationships. Um, what are the other sort of key triggers and causes of emotional eating?
Yeah. So I think there are people are leaving a lot of basics. They're not doing the basics correctly. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of correlations between people who excessively fast. So people who love intermittent fasting, there's also a big relationship with binge eating with those sort of people as well. So I know it can work for some, but for a lot, I think you're just setting yourself up for binge eating later on, especially if you're overly restrictive throughout the morning period. People think, oh, if I can shorten my eating window, I'll end up eating less overall. And that just doesn't always end up being the case because that excessive hunger that you accumulate because of the fasting actually makes you overeat even more in the evening. And then what happens is you binge eat at night and then you start that cycle again because you've eaten so much at night, you don't want to eat in the morning, you know? So things like intermittent fasting seems to be quite a big predisposer to binge eating. Just not having, or on the flip side is, yeah, just leaving too much of a gap between your meals as well. If you're not eating every few hours, I think it can be very easy to get to dinner time, or if you skipped a lunch or you skip something, it can be very easy to get to your next meal and just want to over consume. Having very poor sleep, that we all know that when we don't sleep well, our desire to eat well and want to eat healthy food also diminishes, right? So there are a lot of these basic things that people can be doing to help reduce the incidences of emotional eating, but only because these things help you manage your emotions better, right? So
Mm.
having more regular meals, high protein, high fiber meals is going to help. If we go back to the whole blood sugar conversation, it's going to help keep your blood sugar nice and steady, okay, throughout the day. If that's how you want to look at it, it's going to keep you in a better mood. You're going to have better energy levels. If you sleep well, you're not going to feel so lethargic and so tired. You're not going to want to go for that pick me up, right? And we all know that when we haven't had a good night's sleep, like your emotional regulation is really bad. Like you're a really shitty person to be around. I know I am, and I'm aware of it. I'm like, I've had like 5 hours sleep tonight. I'm going to hate every single person, but I'm aware of it, meaning that I'm still going to put actions in place to be like, well, yeah, I'm going to be a little bit extra hungry or what have you today, but I don't have to act on it. Deal with it. You had a shitty sleep. Fix that. That's the issue. Fix it. Eating will never ever fix the issue. And I think if anyone takes anything away from this whole conversation on emotional eating is that no matter what is hurting you or stressing you out or upsetting you, food will never, ever fix it. So why use that as a solution? It's never going to be the right solution for the problem. You have to deal with the problem head on. But again, I think people don't like conflict. People don't like having the hard conversation. They don't like dealing with the actual issue at hand. They like complaining about the issue. They like trying to eat the issue away. But all these things are only going to lead to you living a shitty life, a fatter life, and not allowing you to get the physique of your dreams. Because fundamentally, that's what it comes down to. The best people I know who are in shape all year long, all the time, also have the best emotional regulation. Would you agree?
I think it's a very strong correlation. I'd say probably not in a perspective of the ones who stay like super shredded, apart from you, of course. But like fitness model, going down the other aspect of like
yeah.
over restriction. But I think the ones that stay in a good sweet spot year round, which I'd say you are probably in a sweet spot. You just have a really good,
for
you just have a
sure.
very lean
For
sweet
me.
spot. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Those staying in who stay in a good sweet spot, do have a good level of emotional regulation, because otherwise it's very, very difficult to maintain a good physique without that. And I think if we look at those who don't rebound after hitting a checkpoint or don't rebound after doing a photo shoot, it's always because they've stepped into that new identity. They've moved away from old behaviors. They've rewired those bad habits. And for many people, they would have resolved the unresolved in whatever way that happens. I think a lot of the times that can be done just through the process itself. I don't think it's something we facilitate because it's out of our scope. But it can happen automatically if you just give it enough time and exposure. And I think if you don't emotionally eat, you give that unresolved exposure to become resolved. And oftentimes just looking at that unresolved from a third eye or from an objective view in hindsight, and looking at it and thinking, actually, why am I eating because of that? Like, that one thing that happened all those years ago, I'm eating because of that. I didn't even realize. That caused the habit, that caused the learned behavior, that caused the daily
the loop
routine.
Yeah. And the great thing is, just like with any habit, the more you learn to not emotionally eat, and the more you cope with your emotions in a different way, the more cemented those habits will become. Because you never unlearn something. You just develop stronger learnings, or the wiring of the brain to a stronger habit. So you will never get rid of the emotional eating wiring. You will just build stronger wires of coping with it in a different way. So when those wires become stronger than the emotional eating wires, then that now becomes your default. Okay. So, but it can be done. And it just takes a long time. It takes a lot of practice. It takes it's getting the reps in, right? And this doesn't mean being perfect. Sometimes it's going to get the better of you. And there are going to be moments where you resort to food. But let's just say, back in the day, you used to stress eat every single weekend, and now you're doing it maybe once a month or once every few weeks. That's still progress. You know what I mean? That's still progression. And then maybe in a year's time, it's maybe once every few months, and then once every 6 months, So it's one of those things where relapse can happen just like that, just like with drugs and just like with any sort of addiction. But you do have the capacity to improve it, and you do have the capacity to keep working on it, because it is hard. It is really, really hard, especially if it's something that you've got a lot of comfort from. And yeah, I just think these days a lot of people are they're very uncomfortable sitting with emotions. They're very uncomfortable dealing with adversity a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, they want to get rid of it straight away. Like, the natural inclination is, I need something pleasurable. It's just like, well, no, maybe just sit with that emotion, recognize it a little bit. What can you do about it? Find the options, do that. Focus on what you can control, right? We always love talking about that. And I think when you approach it with that mentality, I think you become so much better at regulating this aspect of your life, And I think it's just so pivotal. And I think so many people would be so much happier not resorting to food as a coping mechanism. I'm sure I don't know anyone who is happy that they binge eat,
And for those thinking, I don't binge eat, but you might stress eat, you might pick at food, you might snack. I think just use the same terminology for all of them, because even excess snacking
Yeah.
is probably just a different word for it. You
Yeah.
eat out of boredom.
It's a coping mechanism.
You drink out of boredom.
Yeah.
You eat out of boredom. Like all these things are like drinking out of boredom is a big one. You're bored and you're bored at a social event. You don't want to say anything, but you just drink. So all these things can be
Yeah.
you can replace the word or the phrase for whatever is most applicable to you.
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said for like leaning into the mundane. I've been like thinking about this more of like how do
Me
you
too.
when
Yeah.
it's like the mundane moments in your day, how do I not just fall into the routine distraction? Like for example,
Yeah.
when you're sitting on the toilet, how do I just sit there without pulling out a book or without pulling out my phone? And it's like sometimes it's just a habit or it's just a distraction or like, oh, I can't actually just sit there. And it can be
Yeah.
difficult once you've trained your mind to just be so busy and so distracted. And I think our attention and focus is getting lower and lower. This is potentially a slightly off topic tangent, but at the same time, it kind of links to this ability to just sit there with the mundane. And that's when usually the drinking and the food kicks in, is when you're just a bit bored or you don't want to just sit there. It's very hard, isn't it?
Yeah. What's wrong with being bored? What's wrong with being bored, right? Like, what did people used to do when there was no smartphones with you? People would just be bored sometimes. And like, that's okay. I think that's the way I try it, because I've been working on the same thing too. I've been doing a lot of unplugged walks as well. Like sometimes I love podcasts, I love listening to stuff, but there comes a point where I just don't want to hear other people's thoughts. I want to hear
Yeah.
my thoughts, like, and having that period of just unplugging and purposefully chasing boredom as well, I think just refreshes my mind as well. It makes me then appreciate getting back into what I love doing. I think you need that disconnect, and I sometimes intentionally search for boredom so that I can come back to doing what I need to be doing with more like vigor and more intent. So sometimes I won't even watch any television. I'll literally just sit on the couch and just whatever. Won't even look at my phone. Won't do nothing. I just want to remove any stimulation from the mind. And it's a little bit scary at first, but it's great. Like I feel really reinvigorated afterwards, and I think it's the way I frame it though, is I know that doing this is going to allow me to perform better later in the day. So that's the way I frame it. I don't know if you do the same, but I seem to enjoy those periods.
Yeah, the moment I'm trying to do it is like I don't want to have these addictions or these distractions. Because whatever you want
I
to call it,
know.
distraction, addiction, like
I
there's so
know.
many. We've discussed like the consumption element through calories, like food and drink, but then there's so many other
Yeah.
ways that you're consuming that's a
Yeah.
distraction as well, right? There's TV, there's content.
Yeah. Your
Content's a big one.
diet
Like
is far more than you eat. Yeah. Your diet is everything. Yeah.
yeah, content is a big
Yeah. What
one.
content are you eating? Right.
Yeah, like if you go for like today, so I didn't go for my run yesterday because I thought I could do with an extra rest day. So I'm gonna go today, and I thought it was 20K. I'm already thinking, oh, what podcasts can last long enough for 20K? But then I'm like, should I try without
Yeah.
it? Yeah, it's a long time to just be running, right? So it's these sorts of things I'm working on at the moment because I think there's a lot of benefit to just creating more gaps in the day. Um, Without going on a complete tangent here for people, if they are struggling with emotional stress eating, you discuss some of the basics like follow a good diet that's evenly spaced through the day. Um, don't excessively
Mm,
fast. Make sure you're sleeping correctly, and if you can't sleep enough, be aware of that. Drinking water, just making you hydrated. That's like the first, like absolute, just cover your basics, right? Just make sure you're following a good diet that doesn't encourage these things. What about the next step? Is there,
mm.
you talked about how often your cadence of relapses. Do you track, if you're experiencing this, is something to be said for tracking and measuring how often you go through these episodes?
Yeah. 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 So I think there's definitely something with like real-time monitoring and reflection. So, we send our members certain questionnaires with regards to, okay, what time did the event happen? Whereabouts were you? What was your environment? What was happening? What were your feelings going into this event prior to it happening? And all these this reflection, I think, is pivotal. I think it's so key to start to understand why things start going pear-shaped, or like, what were some triggers that led to the event happening, Once you start to understand what triggers you specifically, you can then start to put strategies in place to mitigate that, So for example, if you know that a bad night's sleep, for example, is something that is a trigger for emotional eating. Okay, well then what is within your control that you could potentially do to mitigate that, and to know, is it simply just telling yourself, okay, I haven't had the best sleep. I know that my craving is going to be a little bit higher and my propensity to want to emotionally eat is going to be higher, but I'm aware of it. And I'm going to do things such as, space my meal, do the basics. I'm going to do the basics to the best of my ability. And I'm going to, understand that I don't have to act on these emotions or feelings, So if you know that you're going to have one of those days, you can put strategies in place. But again, I think you need to bring awareness to the situation. I think a lot of people just want to dismiss it. That's the natural inclination, is to, I just want to forget what I just did. That's embarrassing. I don't want anyone to know. You have to go against that, and you have to reflect. The sooner you can reflect, the better. Like if you can stop yourself mid binge, that's really cool, but you have to have this level of reflection and be comfortable going back and then seeing, okay, what happened here? Did this stress me out? Did I have this conversation and then I wanted to do this? Okay, why did I go for that? The more introspection you can have with these scenarios, I think the better equipped you're going to be. And as always, it's not about just reflecting. You have to then take action on that. Okay. So having that introspection, having the understanding of what causes it, what environment you're in, when it usually happens, it doesn't happen at a certain time of day. No one, I don't know anyone who wakes up and has a pint of ice cream because they had a nightmare, but it usually happens at the end of the day, right? So they get home, they've had a really stressful event or what have you, and then maybe that's the time. So if you know that's where you're most vulnerable, okay, I know that I'm most vulnerable at nighttime. Some things that I can put in place is to not have these certain foods in my house, to communicate with my partner, hey, I've had a bit of a rough day. Can we go for a walk? Can we do something that's going to take my mind away from food? Or, it's whatever it is. It's whatever's going to help you deal with the situation more effectively. Okay. So having that layer of reflection and knowing what is going on around you during these episodes, I think is really key and very overlooked, because as I said earlier, people want to forget. They don't want to deal with the problem. They don't want to admit that they did this.
I think if you're wondering why this is important and the hold it may have on you, an exercise that I shared with you the other day, the fear setting exercise that Tim Ferriss talks about from Stoics. And he said, like, if you don't change this behavior, and whatever that behavior is, for this specific one, it's emotional eating. If you don't change that, what's the emotional, physical, mental effect on you in 6, 12, and 18 months? And write that out, and write out what is the reality of staying like this and continuing those behaviors, continuing those reactions. And it'll be pretty stark, right? It'll be like, it could be, I'm going to continue getting bigger. I'm going to struggle with my food. I'm still going to be struggling with my food. I'm going to struggle with my relationships and my weight, and that's going to impact my confidence. And all those, it's a domino effect.
Yeah.
And I think that's a useful exercise for people to do, to really sort of bring to awareness the problem. And you can apply that to whether it's boredom eating, stress eating, binge eating, alcohol, drugs, whatever your vice is, and we all have them. But if it's around calories and that's impacting your body composition, exercise, then it's getting real aware and connected to that.
Yeah, agreed. So yeah, that would be layer 2 in my opinion. So you've got your basics covered, and then layer 2 would be reflection. I think that would be the best way to go. What was layer 3? I think I had 4 steps.
Yeah, step 1 was back to basics. Step 2 was tracking and reflecting. Step 3 was changing the way you think. Step 4 was implementation.
Yeah, it ties in with number 4. Yeah, so step 3 and step 4, they go together. So I think this is the most important one, in my opinion, is literally changing the way you frame everything and the situation. It's all well and good to have these strategies, such as being able to go for a walk or rely on someone, call a partner, this and that. But fundamentally, the place that you want to get to is that even though you are having the worst day, everything has just gone pear-shaped, you are feeling really down, you're feeling really sad, you get home and you just see this pint of Ben and Jerry's in the ice cream, or you see this pint of Ben and Jerry's in the freezer. You know, you come to this conclusion that all I want to do, you just say to yourself, that is not going to help the situation whatsoever. I need to go deal with the problem, and it's that way of thinking and understanding that food will never resolve the problem. It never will. But really conceptualizing that and really understanding that, I think is so powerful. And I don't know if it just sounds super simple to us, but if you can really internalize that as like if there's one thing you take away from this whole chat, is just that food will never fix the gaping hole that is, what you're suffering with. It just won't. You have to deal with a problem head on. And, I love talking about active and passive coping, right? So active coping, for those who don't know, is taking steps in a direction that is actually going to resolve the problem at hand. What is within your control that you can do about it? If you have an argument with your partner, don't just bury your head in the sand or just give them the silent treatment. Can you have a conversation with them to resolve the problem? Can you do something to help resolve the situation? Eating food, treating them like garbage, all these are passive coping mechanisms, burying your head in the sand, hoping it just goes away on its own. That's what passive coping is. And again, binging or eating in general for comfort is passive coping. Going to alcohol, going to drugs, going to whatever any distraction that you can think of, even exercise. If you think you can just exercise your way out of a bad relationship, or you can exercise your way out of something bad, no, that's not going to help. You have to learn to cope with the problem head on. And this is where the whole notion of, okay, cool, what's in my control and what isn't? And then you focus on the factors that you can control. And then you start taking steps towards that, and you not disregard, but you just acknowledge the things that you can't. You focus on what you can. And the more you can embed that way of thinking when it comes to these sort of things, the better off you're going to be over the long run. Because fundamentally, I personally don't know what's a better solution than that. Do you have any better like mindset strategies when it comes to just solving problems from a mindset perspective?
I think it boils down to 3 steps: is being aware of it. I think accepting it. I think that's another big one. Like accepting is probably the second step for me, is where I think it's very easy to be aware of things, but not accept it truly, that it's a problem you're facing. Accepting the fact that you are struggling with this. I think isn't that like the first step of like Alcoholics Anonymous? It's like the first step is acceptance, that you've got a problem.
Pretty much accepting that you have a problem.
So I think once you're aware of it, then you need to accept it, and then you need to act. I think action becomes a lot easier when you can accept it. But I think acceptance is the hardest one, because it's you can kind of fake accept it. So you don't really accept it yourself, but you're kind of like, yeah, I struggle with that. And then you kind of brush it off and carry on with the day. So I think really understanding you've got
and you do nothing about it.
Yeah, you do nothing about it. And you just keep basically spinning your wheels for the next 10, 20 years. And I think one thing we spoke about, which I thought was a tangent, but it's actually probably quite useful for this whole concept, is seeking out a bit more mundane. Whether that's a 30-minute unplugged walk, which is probably the most easy way to start. I think start with a 30-minute unplugged walk, and you might find that a lot of the problems that are causing and triggering these episodes start to come to the surface, and you can start actually problem solving. Because when you're unplugged and you're walking, the things that come up and you think about will be the things that you need to solve. Sometimes you'll have a blank slate, but the reality is, for most of us, the things that pop up will be the problem that we know we need to solve. It's that relationship, it's that conversation, it's that problem at work, whatever it is. I think that's a really good starting point for a lot of people, because you get some exercise in, you get outside, get some fresh air, and your mind will be in a better place. But you'll be able to see things from an objective perspective, to then take action on. At the same time, when you're in that moment, if when the moment strikes and you succumb, this is where that log would be really useful, because then you can kind of start building out, when it happens, when does it not happen, and then like you said, try and stop yourself in the middle of
Mm,
it, or even just have awareness that it's even happening. Because sometimes you don't even know it's happening until you listen to something like this and you
yeah,
realize, oh wow, this is the reason why I'm gaining so much weight. Oh, this is why I'm struggling to keep the weight off. So I think that would be
agreed.
a first step to begin with. And just know that it's going to take time. Like we're dealing with years and decades of bad habits, of potential unresolved issues. So they're not going to be solved in a few weeks or days or months. You're going to have to go through a long slog to sort of find that uh, solution that works for you. And ultimately, there shouldn't be a solution because when you're in the right
Agreed. And
when you're in the right mind frame, there isn't a solution. You just live in that way.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And we always talk about this, right? Like it can take you 3, 6, 12 months to lose the physical weight, but losing that emotional and mental weight takes years. It takes so long to identify as that new person, right? And yeah, this is where all this work comes in, and it's not going to happen overnight. And yeah, it's a long process, but I know that the rewards at the end of it are going to be phenomenal. I'm sure people don't want to be going to their 50s and 60s, 70s, relying on food to comfort them, right? So yeah,
Hopefully, this gives the listeners food for thought. If you are listening and you're struggling with this, maybe it's definitely worth going through and make some notes, starting the exercises, just start getting a bit more introspective and aware of what's going on, and know that you're not abnormal. It's not something to be concerned about. It doesn't have to be diagnosed. It's not a real issue. It's not a disorder. It's just an issue that all of us are facing in some form. And if the vice happens to be around food or drink, then just show up in various different ways. But we all have our vices, and I think it's about taking control of those vices that allows us to live a happier and healthier life.
embrace the mundane.